Okay, we should be good.
Great, thank you. So welcome everybody. I'm Ken McDonald. I'm the chief of the wildlife division with Montana Fish, Life and Parks out of Helena. And I'm a member of the Montana Wildlife Transportation Partnership Steering Committee, which I'll talk about in just a minute. The webinar today is focused on going over the application for wildlife transportation accommodation proposals with the intent of helping potential applicants to submit a complete and thorough application. We'll be talking about the application process today. A little background how we got here. So back in 2018, the governor, the Department of Transportation, Montana Fish, Life and Parks, the Western Transportation Institute, and a coalition of non-government organizations and advocates called Montanans for Safe Wildlife Passage jointly hosted the first ever Montana Wildlife and Transportation Summit. The outcome of that summit was an agreement, an MOU signed by the Department of Transportation, FWP, to help ensure agencies continue working together. Another outcome was following the summit was an agreement by the two agencies as well as Montanans for Safe Wildlife Passage to work together to implement recommendations that came out of that summit. And that has resulted in us working on a partnership in a collaborative way to help facilitate wildlife accommodation. So the partnership consists of a steering committee comprised of 2 representatives each from each of those 3 entities. We also have a planning and implementation team, and we also have a data and information work group. That work group's comprised of research, data management, and GIS specialists that help develop a planning tool that we talked about in a previous webinar or two. So a recommendation from that summit was to bring public and private partnerships together to propose and develop wildlife accommodation projects that support wildlife connectivity. We described that in a previous webinar. So again, today's webinar is to provide information for completing applications for standalone projects that help facilitate wildlife accommodation associated with state transportation corridors. So again, the main focus of today's meeting is we're going to go through each section of the application for submitting project proposals. And then we will, at the end of each section, we'll describe each section. At the end of each section, we'll open it up for questions about that section. So this is really about us here answering questions that the potential applicants have versus a lot of information sharing. The other thing that we just want you to be aware of is all of the stuff we're going to be talking about is on the website. You'll see that website on the screen. The information on that website includes the application itself. There's a guidance document. There's a frequently asked questions and answers, and then some appendices that include the application outline, a budget worksheet example, project application attachments, and selection criteria. So the application period, the next time will be November 1 through November 30. So we're hoping the webinar today will allow you to get any questions you have answered, or at least point in the right direction to how you can get those answered. So joining me today, we'll have 2 other speakers. We're going to have Stephanie Adams, who's on the steering committee with Montanans for Safe Wildlife Passage, and Tom Martin, who's with Montana Department of Transportation. We'll also have several people from the steering committee, the technical committee, online, able to answer questions as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Adams, who will take you through the first parts of the application. Any questions on that? Well, I should say one thing. So logistics wise, the way it's set up is you can raise your hand and get recognized at the end of each section, or you can type a question in the chat or in the Q&A section, and our technical folks will bring those up and direct them to the right person to answer the question. So hopefully that makes sense. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you all again for joining us today. So today our goal is really to take a quick walk through the application so that we can provide more detail on the types of information that would really help a proposal advance. If you haven't already, highly encourage you to take a look at that detailed project application guidance document, as well as the project selection criteria. Both of those are available on the partnership website and are really a great way to start to build out your evaluation. Just really want to flag that in order to evaluate the feasibility and the expected benefits of a proposal, the application really does require a comprehensive overview of your project. We really encourage you to complete these questions to the best of your ability and really use this as a chance to consider engaging partners, including Department of Transportation and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Again, applications can be for projects that are at various scales and stages of development, ranging from projects that are at a concept level to ones that are further along. A big thing to keep in mind is a project is more likely to advance if it's collaborative, well-developed, supported by the community, really sustained by compelling data, and you've taken the time to identify potential funding sources, even if they haven't been secured. And then another important flag is that applications will only be accepted if they're completed. And so again, complete them to the best of your ability and use this as a chance to engage MDT, FWP, and other partners. So we're going to jump right into the first section of the application. Pretty straightforward. This is where you're doing application name and contact information. The thing we really wanted to flag here is question C, which asks for you to provide the names and contact information of immediately adjacent or directly impacted landowners. And that can be very high-level information that's found through a site such as the Montana Cadastral. This is a chance to also note whether or not you've discussed the project with these landowners. While it's not a requirement, and it might not be necessary based on the type of project, we really feel that the success of this program depends on continued community support. So we really are encouraging people to engage impacted and adjacent landowners early and often. Moving into section 2, once again, that first section and this section are not scored, but this is where you're really getting some preliminary information down about your project. In this section, you're really just going to be providing some general descriptive information about your project. This would include a short descriptive name, something that's easy to reference your project. It could be something like Happy Valley Overpass or Underpass on Highway 193 west of Happyville. And again, just kind of easy things so that we can quickly reference them. As far as location, we're asking that you be as specific as possible for your location. If you're proposing spot improvements, such as a structure or a jump out, please include the discrete mile marker locations. If you're proposing a longer stretch of treatment, such as fencing or an animal detection system, please include the mile marker ranges. Mile markers can be identified on the planning tool, and that's a resource that we encourage folks to look at for all types of information and can be found on the website. And if you haven't checked it out already, there's a previously recorded webinar on how to use the planning tool. As part of this application in this section, we're also asking the applicants include a map or multiple maps that really show the site of your project and indicate if the land that's adjacent is either public or private. This can be uploaded as an attachment. This next section is where we're really looking for that project overview. Again, this is not scored. This is really where we're asking folks to put together that sort of high-level elevator pitch of your project. You're going to dig deeper into all of these pieces in the next section, but this is a chance to do that sort of quick high-level summary that really shows the core premise of your proposal. The project overview should really identify three things. You should outline your challenge, and this is really what are you trying to address? It could be something like a busy highway is dividing two portions of an elk herd's winter range, which is impacting the health of the herd and causing threats not only to drivers, but also increased elk mortality. Once you've identified your challenge, we're asking that you do a quick high-level overview of your solution. This should be a specific treatment. It could be something like installing 2 miles of fencing to divert elk towards an existing underpass, or something like constructing a wildlife-specific underpass and installing 2 miles of fencing. And then this project overview should also include a quick high-level summary of what you believe will be the expected benefit. It could be something such as the health of the elk herd will improve due to increased access to their winter range. Other species like moose or bear will also use the underpass, and that will reduce mortalities. And it will respond to concerns from the community who are worried about injury and costs from hitting elk. So once again, this is just your high-level overview of your project with the idea that you'll then really dig into those pieces in those next few sections. We're going to pause now just to see if anyone has any initial questions, recognizing that that was a bit of the more straightforward information. And again, please feel free to raise your hand or type any questions in the chat. And there might not be any, since this is a pretty straightforward section. Hearing none, I'm going to keep going, recognizing that feel free to raise questions in the next section if it comes up. So we're now going to move into the sections that are scored. And once again, encourage you to look at the scoring criteria to help you really get a good sense of what makes a strong proposal in these sections. We're going to start with the purpose of the need. This is the section where you'll really want to build the case for why we should invest limited resources in this project, recognizing that there are numerous transportation infrastructure project needs across the state. You'll want to really begin by building out that challenge, proposed solution, and expected benefit that you just briefly outlined. Make sure that you're clearly articulating not only the challenge, but how your solution is really the right approach, location, and treatment to address that challenge. You're going to dive deeper into the supporting data and the specifics of the proposed projects and the expected benefits in the next three sections. But this first one, A, should really be a more in-depth summary that tells sort of the primary story of your project's purpose. Ideally, this section will also have a summary of the data, recognizing that you'll dig deeper into the data in the following sections. And you'll really want to make sure that you're connecting everything back to the challenge that you identified. Moving to this next section, B, this is where you're going to really dive deeper into your data. So you've kind of hit the high-level summary of your data up to this point, but this section takes a deeper dive into that data and really what is the story that your data tells. You should attach original data summaries or analysis as of attachments, but make sure that you're identifying those sources in this section when you reference them. You want to make sure you're including both broad scale data as well as localized data. Broad scale data is really the information that informs why you're proposing a project in this general landscape. This could include, but is not limited to, things such as research that models specific species movement and shows the importance of this general area, modeling that shows this area is important for connectivity. And these are just a few. And these can be a good area, especially if you could talk to your local fish, wildlife, and parks biologist and others and get a sense of sort of what their perspective is on this value, or sorry, of this landscape. You can also really look at the research and data that forms the foundation of that planning tool. That tool can be used for more than just identifying sections, but also really digging in deeper to that data. In addition to that broad scale data, you'll also really want to include some finer scale assessments. And that's going to be what really helps support your case for why this specific spot is in need of a project. Again, this could be based on professional consultation, GPS collar data, really boots on the ground observation, camera trap data. More folks are looking at citizen science options such as the Roads app, or carcass and crash collection data. One thing that we are asking is that you include the average score that the segment that you're identifying has in the planning tool. You'll want to identify the overall footprint of your project. So for example, if you're proposing an overpass, it's not just sort of the footprint of the overpass, but also the associated fencing that you're going to consider putting in. And you'll then want to use the planning tool's overall assessment score for each of those segments to develop an average score for your project. And again, if you're ever having any trouble with that planning tool, don't hesitate to reach out. The next section is where you're really going to dive deeper into the needs and benefits. This is where you're going to precisely lay out the specific features and strategies of your project. Sorry, this is the project proposal where you talk exactly about what the project's going to look like. Really make sure that you're including all your features and your strategies. You're relating it back to your purpose and need, and you're including things such as dimensions, exact location, and length for each feature or strategy. You'll want to identify if this is new infrastructure or if you're proposing to retrofit existing infrastructure. An example of this, and a very simplified example, could be that you've identified that we need an underpass for deer in an area where we have elevated deer collisions. You might propose a reinforced concrete box culvert. You want to identify that it's 14 feet wide, 9 feet tall, and 145 feet long. You're proposing that you think each side of that needs a half a mile of exclusionary fencing along the right-of-way. And that fencing needs to have 4 wildlife jump outs to allow animals within the highway side to escape. And you'll also want to identify if you're going to put in features such as some landscaping within the underpass so that other animals can use it as well. And also some potential plant coverings along the outside to help move animals to that opening. Just want to note within this section, recognizing that you might not get every piece right, but if it seems like it's a good idea and a good area, this is where we really want to be able to work with folks to advance an idea. So maybe the box culvert's not the right fit and it needs to be longer or wider or things of that nature. That certainly would not be a reason that a project wouldn't advance. Within this section, you'll want to include some attachments, including an aerial photo of your project site with some maybe preliminary sketches of the features. And if you've got them available, detailed sketches or plan views that really help illustrate the project, as well as maybe any pre-project photographs. Now's your chance to move to the next section where you'll want to show the expected benefits of your particular treatment in this particular area. This is really your opportunity to show why this is going to address the things that you've raised. Really the big question is, what will be the change on the ground and how do you know your project will lead to that change? You'll want to really be able to articulate and back up those benefits with different types of resources. This could include, literature that shows that certain type of infrastructure is used by certain species, and those species are the ones that you're really trying to support. It could be expert opinion about a particular design or a particular design in a type of landscape. Or you could look to data from similar situations. Again, another great place to really be engaging those working in design in this space. And we ask that you once again include relevant sources for this. So we're going to pause again now that we've gone through the needs and benefits and see if there are any questions. I'm just doing such a good job explaining it. It doesn't seem like there are. Well, once again, do not hesitate if a question comes up from these earlier sections as we keep moving forward. And just to make sure, and I'll check with Casey, folks can ask questions if they have it verbally or type it in the chat box, correct?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yes, the Q&A, if they hover over the Zoom window, the Q&A is where they can ask, so they can start typing anytime.
Sounds good. Well, again, we'll pause in one more section to see if there are any other questions. So shifting on to the next section that really looks at implementation. Really, how are you going to get the project done? I think within this section, the scope of the project can really determine the type and amount of community engagement that's needed. But again, we really feel that this whole program is built on the premise that projects will be more successful if they're driven by the community, supported by the community, and really engage community members for that local knowledge. And so we encourage people to engage the community whenever possible. So within this question, we're really looking for you to document how you've done some community engagement if it's appropriate. These could be things such as summarizing the outreach and engagement that you've done, such as noting the individual meetings that you've had with landowners or other stakeholders. It could include things such as showing how communities have been engaged through events or citizen science. This could also be an opportunity to attach letters of support or endorsements from communities or counties or other civic organizations. So really, what are the ways that you can show, if it's appropriate, that this project has a lot of buy-in from those who will be affected by it? Once you show your community engagement, we also were really thinking about how does a specific project fit with current things on the landscape or future things on the landscape. So really, how will complementary projects or conservation efforts in that proposed area help support the success of this project? So within this section, really think about projects that are directly adjacent to the site, as well as those that are occurring on the broader landscape. So, certainly not limited to, but could include things such as habitat restoration projects or wildlife friendly fencing projects. Are there efforts going on in the area to mitigate conflicts with carnivores, such as rain riders or securing attractants? Are there other efforts on the ground that help show why investing in this area will sort of align with other investments? Within this, we're asking folks to include the status of that complementary effort, who's doing it, and then, a quick summary of how that will benefit the success of this proposed project. Once you have identified some of those complementary projects, we move to the section that's really looking at land protections and land use, really getting a sense for, does this project fit with sort of that overall vision or management direction for that landscape? And again, this, is important to look at not only the landscape right around that project, but also, whether or not there is management direction that makes this project a good fit for that broader landscape. So in this section, we're asking folks to provide really support that shows that this investment makes sense on this landscape. So this could include things such as identifying land protections, whether it's conservation easements or public land in that landscape, identifying if there's supportive zoning or covenants that would make this a good place for investment. You could also include things such as a reference to management plans or guidance from nearby land management agencies, local governments, whether it's state, county, tribal governments. This might be a spot to note whether or not this section or this landscape is within the State Wildlife Action Plan focal areas or other sort of strategic direction from the natural resource management agencies. Really, we're just looking for protections, plans, policy, management direction, or vision that supports that an investment in this area is in alignment with putting something like a crossing or a culvert or an animal detection system in that area. So just to wrap up this implementation section, we'll move into partnerships. Again, we really feel strongly that these projects are most successful when there are a number of partners working together to develop, implement, and fund a project. And so within this section, we're asking applicants to identify, if there are any, who the partners are and what they're contributing, whether it's funding, capacity, expertise, community engagement, data collection, technical expertise. And this is an area where I would once again encourage you, if you're thinking about a more complex project, engage the Department of Transportation and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks early, and note in here if they are engaged in the project and identify them as a partner. With that, we will pause and see if there are any questions in those first few sections. Hearing none, I'm gonna turn the mic over.
Am I seeing that there's a question that somebody wanted to ask?
I think that could be from Kylie. So Kylie, if you want to ask your question, go ahead.
Sure. So I thought I'd ask this for just as a general question from others, but in terms of the landowner community part, here I can actually be on video. Hello. Hi. Oh, but now I'm over here. We're wondering for the landowner and community outreach components, what does this group think about whether it's enough if there is mostly just a plan to do outreach and communications to landowners and to the public, or where perhaps part of it's been done, but not the whole shebang before the timing of an application? So like, what does this group, what is thought about with kind of a partial aspect with a plan to do even more into the future with landowner and public outreach? What do we all think?
I'll be happy to give you my opinion. I think overall, I think that's just fine. Of course, an application is probably going to score a little better if there has been some upfront coordination that's gone on. But if there's a plan to do more in the future, definitely bring that up. I think that's just fine, even if the bulk of it's going to be done later. I do recommend that there's some done up front, but if you plan to do more, talk about it. Definitely put that in your application. That's my opinion.
Seeing no other questions, I will turn it over to Tom. And again, encourage folks, if questions about these first pieces come up later on, please feel free to ask them. And again, please reach out to the link on the Transportation Partnership. And thank you guys for attending.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Martin. I'm the Environmental Services Bureau Chief for MDT, Montana Department of Transportation. And I'm going to go over a couple of segments of the application with you today. Let me get my presentation queued up here and started. Oops, sorry, got to share first. So hopefully you can see my slides there. If not, someone shoot me a message.
Nope, looking good.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I'm one of the steering committee members for MDT. The other is Dwayne Cayley, who's our Chief Operating Officer. Dwayne, I think last time started off with a joke, so I'm going to do the same. What do you call a reluctant potato? Anybody? A hesitator. Now, I know some of you are laughing at that. I can feel it. All right, moving on. So the first section I'm going to talk about today is funding. It's worth a total of 10 points max. And before I dive into the cost estimation and funding, I just want to cover a couple things real quick. The first is this is obviously a private-public partnership that we're trying to do here. So we want to see success in this program, and know that there are going to be questions, if not today, certainly more in the future. As you're preparing your application, feel free to reach out to us. There is a spot in our webpage that has a contact us. You just click that link and you can probably see it from there, and ask your question. We're happy to help. Anybody in the partnership can help you and get you in contact with the people that we're going to help you get your application prepared the best it can be. The other thing is, applicants, project proponents, you are expected to bring some level of funding for the project. Now, that can be a whole host of things. It could be philanthropic donations, private funds, government funds, government grants, discretionary grants, however you want to wrap that up. But you are expected to bring some funding to it. MDT and FWP agency staff are willing to help you if you need some help in actually scoping what you think your project will be. They can help guide you with some questions and answers and get you started there. So that's important when we're talking about this public and private partnership. The other thing is, I'm going to talk about cost estimation here in just a minute. When you're preparing your cost estimate for your project, if you're uninitiated to road construction, you're going to see that it's very expensive. That's just the way it is. Don't be too alarmed, but be advised that things cost more than they seem to. Please work with MDT staff or consultants if you have that option available to you on your project cost estimating, especially if we're talking about a more complex type of project like an underpass or an overpass. Well, you'll want some help in making sure you have the right bid items. And speaking of bid items, there is a hyperlink that's within our cost estimate spreadsheet. It's here again. We'll dig into that a little bit more and I'll show you how to get to it. Now, one last slide before I get into the cost estimate spreadsheet. This is kind of in a funny spot, but I feel obligated to talk about it. When the subject of a feasibility study comes up, that seems to raise some confusion for folks and lots of questions. While you're filling out your application, you really don't have to be too concerned about if a feasibility study is needed or not. The feasibility study is going to occur well after your project has been applied for, and it occurs even after your project, if selected, is selected. So it's not something you have to dwell on in preparing your application. Not all projects, selected by the partnership are going to need a feasibility study. Mostly those are for complex projects, like a crossing of some sort. And the partnership will actually be the ones that implement that feasibility study through MDT. And MDT is going to provide up to $500,000 a year to complete those feasibility studies. The reason I mention this is it generally raises a lot of questions, and you're going to see it in the cost estimate. So I just wanted to get that out front. It's kind of like that old Prego spaghetti sauce commercial. You know what they used to say? It's in there. Or as the kids like to say, it's baked in these days. So, moving along. So the cost estimate spreadsheet, it's the broad, or otherwise known as a project budget worksheet. This is something that has to be completed for every project application. So you're going to want to clearly identify the total cost of the project, including development, design, and construction. This spreadsheet's going to help you. You're going to complete this budget template, make sure you complete it. You're going to identify the major line items in the proposal. We sometimes call those bid items, and you're going to use the appropriate average bid prices. So a few tricks to this thing. Hopefully you can see my cursor. You notice this is a white area. That's an area for you to provide input. Pretty straightforward in this, your applicant, contact, and project name. Now down here, for some of the engineering costs, otherwise known as project development costs, you'll see that some of these are all gray. Well, that's because those are auto-populated based on other information you're going to provide in this spreadsheet. So here's that feasibility study. If you needed a feasibility study for this project, and this project is a more complex one, we estimate that it's going to cost about $200,000 to do. You don't have to worry about that. It's going to auto-populate. Same thing for the engineering design. This is going to auto-populate with an estimate of what the actual design will cost for this project. Construction engineering, that's like contract administration. Again, auto-populated, it's based off a percentage. In this case, it's about 100,000. Now, you can add additional rows for items you think need to be included. There's some instructions on how to do that. In this case, we have right-of-way, and this project appears to need some right-of-way. You're going to have a unit of measurement, the number of units, in this case 5 acres, and the cost per unit or cost per acre. So we're anticipating a $50,000 cost per right-of-way here. All of that's going to roll up to the total engineering cost for the project. Oops, sorry. Further on down, the cost estimate, which is again is worth up to 5 points. This right here, this white area, of course, is an input area. This is where you're going to put in the major bid items. This is an undercrossing. I can see it's a reinforced concrete box. The unit of measurement is linear feet. We need about 145 feet of it, and it's about $2,000 a foot. Remember this $2,000 amount. That's going to come up later. We're just looking for the major cost items here. And I really encourage you to reach out to MDT to get some help on this, making sure you have the major items considered. The minor items we're not going to get hung up on. But if you're leaving out some major items up here, that could be cause for your proposal to not go any further. So make sure you get some help if you need it from MDT or others, consultants, to make sure that you have properly considered the major items. You can add rows down here too. A lot of these down here are items that are auto-populated. Traffic control is auto-populated. But right here, you do have to specify, there's a drop-down menu right here, whether it's on the roadway or off the roadway. Mobilization, same. You don't have to input anything. That's going to auto-populate by itself. Some of the MDT standard values, like the contingency, that's dependent on the level of design that is completed. Again, it's going to auto-populate, but you do have to fill in right here. There's a drop-down menu right here that gives you 3 options. The first is no level of design done, completed. Second would be a feasibility study completed. And the third would be design completed. That will change the amount of the contingency. Anticipating, applications right now, I would anticipate all of them would probably be no level of design complete. But I'll leave that up to you folks. Inflation, this is you need to enter the number of years to construct. So this project is a complex one. So you can be pretty sure that it's going to require a feasibility study. That feasibility study will likely take a year, maybe more. So that's 1 year. It's a complex project. It's probably going to take 3 years to design. So that's 4 years total to get you to the point where you're going to construct the project. So that's the number of years here. You can adjust this. It's a drop down. You can pick different values. That brings us to a total cost. Well, let's call it 1.5 million. So lower down on the cost estimate sheet, you'll see some explanations like this. But what I really want to draw your attention to is right here, this red arrow. That is the MDT bid archives. That's where you're going to find the values to put in for some of your major items. Now, if for some reason this link doesn't work, I'm going to show you another way. And since it's recorded, it'll be preserved for posterity. So let's see if this works. I'm going rogue right now. All right, here's our main MDT web page. Where you want to go is right here, doing business. Click it once. Then you want to go down to contracting and bidding. Click that once. Scroll down on that sheet over here to awarded contracts. Where you want to click is right here, bid archives. Click that once. Now we're in the bid archives. These are the average bid prices. So I would start with 2022 to see what you're looking for first. That's going to pop up this sheet. So one of the major bid items was a reinforced concrete box. So you can just do a search for that. I'm going to just go with REIN and see if that's going to get me what I want. Not yet. Not yet. Oh, I'm close. Hey, there it is. Reinforced concrete box, 14 by 9. And that's where the $2,000 came from. Okay, so hopefully that's a little primer for you there. And with any luck, I'll bring this back up. So that is part A, doing the cost estimate. Now I'm going to go to part B, the funding contribution and sources. This is also part of the same spreadsheet, different page, I believe. Some things you're going to want to do here is make sure you clearly identify the sources of your funding and identify the amount of funding from each source. You want to identify the status of the funding source, and there are 3 options you'll get to choose from: secured, pending, or possible. And you'll also want to identify the timeframes and steps needed to secure the pending or possible funding. You need to complete this portion of the budget template, include it with your application, and identify if any remaining gaps occur between the cost and the revenue, if it exists. Now, this spreadsheet is going to help you do all of that. So if you fill it in, this will pretty much be very straightforward and make sure that you complete what's required for this part B. Over here is the contributor, where that source of funding is coming from. In this case, the ABC Collective. They're providing $100,000, and that is secured. Secured means that funding is in hand. It's there, it's available, it's ready for use right now. Here's a discretionary grant listed for about $1 million, and that's pending. And it says here the application has been submitted to the US DOT in August. Well, pending means it's something that's been applied for in terms of a grant and the status is still pending, or it's some sort of written pledge or commitment or even agreement that you can point to that funding is very likely. It's pending. The third is right down here, a generous private contributor who has said they will contribute $350 million. Well, that's kind of possible. It was some great conversation that someone had in a bar. You might want to choose a different descriptor than that, but it's funny. Possible mean it's a verbal pledge. You're pursuing it. It's possible, but it's not committed yet. So those are the 3 different statuses that you can put in this spreadsheet in terms of your funding contributions. So the total of all funding categories in this case is, we'll call it 1.45 million. The total project cost carried forward is 1.47 million. So if all of the funding comes through, there's still a current gap in funding of about $27,000. That's not too bad. But if we're looking at secured funding, that's a much bigger gap because only 100,000 is secured funding. So all of this will auto-populate for you once you fill in up above here. Again, don't rely on MDT to fund the entire project. This is, a public-private partnership. So we're expecting applicants or project proponents to provide funding that they're seeking or have in hand. And I would also tell you, don't completely rely on grants. Grants are great, but they're not secured. MDT has had some success in the past of getting grants, but in all actuality, local governments seem to do a little bit better than us when going after different types of grants. So, oops, sorry. I think I covered everything I need to there. Next slide. So I can't stress this enough. If you need some help when you're completing this cost estimate spreadsheet or any part of the application, on the front of our web page for the Montana Wildlife and Transportation Partnership, down at the bottom, there's this link. Contact us. Feel free to use it. If you've got a question, try to be specific. Maybe you need some estimating help. Maybe you want to talk to a biologist, an agency biologist. Maybe you want to talk to one of our district pre-construction engineers. Maybe you have questions about bid items. Feel free to ask those questions. The partnership will get those questions and we'll get it to the people that can really help you and move that along for you. So that's the end of my section 5, funding. I got another joke for you though. What do you call a magician that has lost his magic? A magician that has lost his magic. Ian. I-A-N. Ian. It's funny, right? Thanks, Deb, for the pity laugh. So I'm open to answering any questions you might have about funding, or if you have questions about the previous segments, feel free to ask those and somebody can answer those for you too.
Tom, there's a few questions in the Q&A. First one is from Clint Nagel. Does the funding from partners have to be a certain percentage of the cost of the total project?
Well, no, it doesn't. Not to propose the project and not to apply for it. Obviously, the more funding that you're bringing forward as an applicant, the better, the higher you'll score. I can tell you that MDT would not move into design until after a feasibility study is done, and all funding has been provided in some way, whether that's funding through the project proponent or applicant, or if MDT or somebody else has decided to participate as well. But for preparing your application, you don't have to have funding completely secured or the entirety of it. Be nice if you did. If you don't, we'd still like you to propose and try to close that gap as close as you can.
Okay, the next one is from Daniel Anderson. I'll just read it to you. Let's say we could receive a large grant from a philanthropic partner, $1 million plus. Does MDT have a location for that donation to be directed, or are we expected to have a partner NGO, like an NGO, to receive that funding? How would that work? Communicating these details with funding partners upfront would be helpful.
Great question. We have received private donations in the past. Each time we've done it, it's been a just a little bit different route as to how we handle that money. Most of the time, it's going to be a case-by-case basis, depending on the project and the situation. But we can handle that. I don't have the specific answer for you right now because we haven't dealt with that in recent times, but we do have people at MDT that know some of our financial folks how to handle that. And I would suggest that you get in contact with MDT at some point to try to help us hone in on the best way to cover that. Sorry, I don't have a better answer. I know we can do it. We've done it before. But specifically, I don't have a great answer. Anybody else have an idea for that on our panel?
I don't have an answer, but I do know that there's efforts or hopes of efforts at play to try to make something work that makes it as easy as possible to do that. Nothing's ready yet, but there are hopes to do that.
And I think a lot of it will depend on the stage the project is in. If it's gone through feasibility and it's a feasible project and there is funding available to move forward in design, we can work on those details with you. I know MDT is rather reluctant to hold the money ourselves until it's ready to be used, but we can work through some of those details.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And this last question is also from Daniel Anderson. I think you spoke to it at the end of your presentation, but I'll ask it here so you can be specific in response. If we need help from MDT on the spreadsheet, are there specific people we should reach out to, or do we send all inquiries to Deb? Smiley face.
All things go through Deb. I would use the contact link, which is really just a fancy spread or a fancy email, and Deb can or somebody else in the partnership can put you in touch with the person you need to be in touch with. Some of that, it depends on the type of project you propose or even where it's at. So for instance, Danielle, I know you live in the Livingston area. That would be in our Butte district. We might put that question to our Butte district pre-construction engineer or one of his staff to help you with the major items. But not going to put words into anybody's mouth right now, but send it to the link.
That was it from Q&A, and I don't see any hands raised from our attendees to ask verbal questions at this point.
Okay, well, I'm going to continue on. Bear with me here. Share my screen. Okay. The next section I'm going to talk about is section 6. That is the feasibility and opportunity portion of the application. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. That section is worth a max of 25 points. And in order to talk about that a little bit more, or to dive into that, I really have to talk about the two, I'll say, classifications of projects that we have, because that's going to impact the information you're going to want to provide in your application. So one of those are the less complex projects, and those can include things like minor fencing,
You didn't read them yet.
wing fencing, signing, vegetation management within the right-of-way. Typically, it's no major equipment operation or no earth-moving activities or minimal ground disturbance. So it's really your smaller projects. And a lot of times those will go through our systems impact process or an encroachment permit. The other type are more complex projects, and those are things like additions or modifications to existing infrastructure. Usually it has a systems impact, meaning that it's going to impact traffic in some way. Longer stretches of exclusionary fencing with jump outs, replacement of existing wildlife crossings, some new structures, or projects where there's a heavy engineering and design component involved, and likely requires some additional authorizations or agreements from outside entities. So those are really the two. Obviously, this one down here that I'm showing is more complex. Some fencing that might be less complex. So part A, the engineering or technical experts that you consult. Lost my place here. So the things you're going to want to talk about here in terms of, any consultation that you have with engineering or technical experts, you want to talk about the utilities or get some input on the utilities. Essentially, if you're in MDT right away, outside of the interstate system, assume that there are going to be utilities within the right of way. You're going to want to ask them about any structural conflicts or impediments, accessibility in terrain, roadway, talk about any right of way considerations, those type of things. For a more complex project, you're going to talk about all the above, but you're also going to really need to talk to somebody from MDT, engineering, or a consultant engineer, and when I say talk to them and get some input from them, this is very high level conversation. It's not a comprehensive review. Basically, it's along the lines of is this project buildable? Is it doable? Does it meet are the technical merits there? We're not asking you to do a feasibility study yourself or have a consultant or MDT do that feasibility study before your application. We have a feasibility stage that I already talked about that's going to further vet the proposal later on. You want to talk about any potential impacts to the traveling public or have your expert weigh in on that, and the anticipated project schedule and duration, and then if there are any right-of-way acquisition or agreements necessary. Those are the things you want to touch on when you're relaying the type of engineering or technical experts you've reached out to. B, that's the biological or ecological feasibility. It's got a score of 0 to 5. For all projects, regardless of their complexity, we want you to describe the consultation that you've had with MDT or FWP or any tribal biologists, the input you've received regarding your challenge, the purpose and need and proposed solution. Talk about any expected benefits from the project. You can also reach out to other biologists or road ecologists, whether they be scientists or consultants or what have you. Talk about any endorsements that you may have from the biological or ecological experts. And again, this is not a study. These are high-level conversations and things for you to document in your application. We're not asking you to spend hours and hours and hours or hundreds and hundreds of dollars trying to do some work in advance. The construction proposal. So for less complex projects, construction is typically going to be completed by either the applicant or their agent, or possibly through an MDT encroachment permit. We want you to describe the general proposal for the construction of the project features, including, what sort of work activities are going to occur during construction, what sort of methods are going to be used, the type of equipment that might be used, if you're planning to use a contractor or not. And if you are using a contractor, make sure they're licensed and bonded within the state. So those are the type of things that we want to see for less complex projects. For more complex projects, the same. But we also need more than that. So more complex projects like an overpass or an underpass, construction is typically let to contract through a formal process. Now, we want you to tell us what that contracting plan is. Are you expecting MDT to do the contract administration, or are you the applicant going to hire a contractor and do the contract administration? Basically identify, the contractors that are going to be responsible and for the construction of the project. So that's what we mean by the contracting plan. How is that going to play out? Essentially taking it from a set of plan specification and estimate to the actual construction and completion. That's the contracting plan. Part D, the post-construction monitoring proposal. All projects are going to require some post-construction monitoring. We want to demonstrate success and that we've made good investments, and we will. But I want you to know that this is scalable to the type of project you have. Not all wildlife accommodation projects are going to necessitate some sort of comprehensive study or research study to evaluate the accommodation effectiveness. Now, some of the more complex projects, that could be a component, but it's going to be scalable to the type of project. So the things that you need to talk about there are, the pre and post comparison of wildlife vehicle collision data, crash or carcass data. If you're going to use camera traps or video monitoring, you can see on the photos below there that MDT does put cameras on all our structures. And so that's one of the ways that we track the success. Tracking beds, snow tracking, other things. You want to talk about the time frame for monitoring as well. So moving on to, I think the last part of this is maintenance and operations proposal. So, and this applies to all projects. So MDT is going to take the majority of the responsibility when we're talking about structures, things, as a part of the roadway or underneath the roadway or over the roadway. We simply have to take that responsibility and maintain those for the life of that feature, for the life of that culvert, life of that bridge, or whatever it is. But we do expect the applicants or the proponents to, handle the day-to-day maintenance. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen every day, but the day-to-day maintenance of things like if a fence needs to be repaired and that was part of your project, we're going to expect you to do that type of maintenance, or any vegetation management, if weed spraying, that sort of thing. That's going to be your responsibility or your agent. We're going to expect the applicants to have some sort of operational role as well. And especially in the case of power or solar or cellular power, cellular data, if there's going to be a variable message sign, those are things that are operational that we will expect the applicant to maintain for the life of that feature. Not necessarily for the life of the structure, but for the life of that feature, whether it's a variable message sign or just power to that feature. In some cases, an agreement will likely be required. Typically, those would be with some sort of agency sponsor, or you could even look into bonding. That's a possibility as well. But we have to have somebody that we can, for lack of a better word, hold accountable for the operational and maintenance items that need to be taken care of. But again, MDT is going to shoulder the burden of that. So that's my shtick for the feasibility and opportunity portion. I do have another joke though. What word becomes shorter when you add 2 letters to it? Short. I'm hearing somebody laughing. I know there's some laughing out there somewhere. Anybody have any questions on this application, section 6, feasibility and opportunity, or anything from previous? Anything? Nothing?
I don't see any hand raised and I don't see anything in the Q&A, but I would just offer one more time for those of you that are actively considering or working on applications or some project identification, this is really a good chance for you to ask questions specific to each section of the application if anything's stumping you. So feel free to jump in if you have a question.
Gotta be something. I know I didn't do that good of a job.
Okay, I have a hypothetical one that is interesting.
I'm scared.
Again, and I'm trying to think indefinite hypothetical ones, but you know, we were discussing the aspect of connecting with agency experts and others on the feasibility section particularly. But what if you're trying to interact with somebody and trying to get information from them or with them in connection with them, and they're just not bought into wildlife crossing structures, or they're not, or I guess that's really the main question. And that can be for any number of reasons from any number of people and from any number of agencies. But if there's some information that is this something you would just connect with your local biologist a little more? Would you interact with, you just ping it, I guess, if you had troubles with any of this stuff, would you just bring it back again to the contact us piece and we'd try to sort it out?
You know, I think the contact us is really a good option because that way we get to keep track of what's been asked and answered, and we know who's in contact with who. It's a form of record keeping for us, and it also helps us make sure we get the right people involved. There's no harm in reaching out to your local MDT biologist or fish, wildlife, and parks biologist, or someone at Montanans for Safe Wildlife Passage. If you know that person, there's no harm in reaching out to that person. But sometimes you might not have the right person. And so that's why I suggest using the contact us list, because we can guarantee that you get an answer that you need from the right person. But I'm not saying you have to use that, but feel free to reach out to us.
It's a great clarification and it's a great tool then. Thanks.
Tom, there's another one in the Q&A that I think is for you too, but I'm not sure, but I think so, from Daniel Anderson. To the point about contractors, it seems like a lot to ask an applicant to define the contracting plan, IDing contractors, etc. Shouldn't this activity be MDT's responsibility?
Great question. It's going to depend on where you're at. Obviously, if let me do a hypothetical, since that's easy to do, Daniel. I appreciate your question. If this were a crossing structure, let's say it's an undercrossing with a culvert or a bridge, doesn't matter. The expectation you have that it's going to be a more complex project. So I think you would be able to say that you expect this to be contracted type of work. And you may not know the contractor, but at least saying that you think it's going to be a contracted type work and that, it's a more complex project and you would anticipate some earth moving equipment, whether that be a dozer or what have you. I think you just needed to give it your best shot. Try to give us as much information as possible. But obviously, if it hasn't been through feasibility stage yet, you're not going to know who the contractor is. You're not going to know exactly how it's going to be constructed. But I think just giving us some information on how you think, if it's going to be a contracted item or if you're going to do it with local forces, those type of things, give us your best shot.
And Tom, maybe another thing I was thinking of about identifying contractors. I mean, is it worth it to say, okay, we're going to need a bridge contractor, right? We're proposing a bridge, and that's different than a culvert or a box culvert, where that would be a earth moving contractor. You know, we're going to need a fencing contractor, or those types of things. And again, I think that that's something that MDT can certainly help you sort out, once you have your project kind of scoped and framed.
Yeah, great addition, and thank you, Deb, because I missed that. Reach out to MDT. We can help you with some of the contracting questions and get you pointed in the right direction. And we're happy to do so. But give it your best shot. Not just because you don't have everything dialed in your application doesn't mean it's going to get rejected. You just have to do the best you can with the information that you have and reach out to folks for help.
Tom, that's a great segue. Clint Nagel put another statement in the chat. Not a question, but just some trepidation about what he doesn't know, which you were just talking about. And he just clarified that he's surprised that MDT feels comfortable placing safety in the general public through contractors rather than doing the work themselves. So maybe that's something you can speak to. It's just
I can.
Okay.
Well, for one thing, MDT doesn't actually do the work ourselves very often. Most of the work that gets done on our highway system is done with contractors. It's just that we let those contracts and administer the construction contract. And that's entirely possible for some of these projects that might be proposed. For a very major complex project, it very well may be that MDT is the one that takes over the construction letting and maybe even some design aspects, but it still has to be funded in some way first. So it's not that we're just going to let Billy Bob and his backhoe out there do anything they want. No, there's going to be lots of oversight. The contractors have to be licensed and bonded, and the contracting mechanism may go through MDT, but it may not as well if it's a smaller project. We own the safety of those routes, and we're not going to jeopardize that in any way just to try to get something out there quick and easy. That's not how we operate. Safety is job one for us. It's the most important thing. And part of the reason for this program is getting more wildlife accommodations on the ground that support safety for our traveling public, as well as safety and connectivity for wild animals. Hopefully that answers your question. I hope I didn't take that the wrong way.
No, that was super, Tom. Thanks. And I think that looks like all the questions we have right now. If you want to just summarize, or Ken looks available. If you could show the last slides, and then maybe Ken can take us out.
I will do so.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Stephanie. That was really helpful and informative. So hopefully those folks on the webinar were able to get some good information. And if nothing else, you'll get an idea of the complexity of this. This isn't just, go build a overpass and call it good. So we're looking for partnerships, as it said. The information is on that website, on the partnership website. And you should be able to find a lot of information there, both in the application help and the FAQs. And then again, there's contacts you can get in touch with through that website, and with the agencies and Montanans for Safe Wildlife Passage, and we should be able to get back to you. So again, the application period is November 1 to November 30 for this go round. And after that, we will be reviewing and scoring those applications and hopefully moving some forward. So again, thank you everybody for joining us, and feel free to get in touch with any of us if you have any questions. Anything else, Tom, Stephanie, Deb?
I don't.
No, I
All
think
right.
Stephanie jumped off. Yeah, I think we're good. Great job, everybody. Thank you. And thanks for all those great questions and for your participation in tonight's webinar. We look
Yes, thank you.
forward to receiving your applications.
Please,
Yes, we do.
Yeah, we do.
thank you all.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good. Just gotta find the leave button.